Welcome to the Crazy Alchemist podcast, where alchemy, occultism, and strange history come alive.
Tolkien spent nearly 60 years building Middle-earth. He drew from Norse mythology, Finnish epic poetry, Welsh phonology, Greek philosophy, and medieval Catholic theology. But the question worth asking is not whether he borrowed, because every mythology borrows from something older. The question is what he made of it. This episode is a source guide. For each major element of Middle-earth, we trace where Tolkien found his raw material and what he changed when he took it. By the end, it should be clear which parts of his world were genuinely his own invention, which parts were transformed source material, and why the distinction matters. In a letter written around 1951, Tolkien explained his purpose to his publisher, Milton Waldman. England, he said, had lost its own native mythology. The Norse had the Eddas, a sprawling cosmology of gods and giants and the end of the world. The Finns had the Kalevala, compiled from oral tradition and assembled into a national epic in 1835. The Welsh had the Mabinogion. England's ancient myths had been scraped away by conquest and the spread of Latin Christianity. The matter of Britain was French in language and Southern in spirit. Tolkien wanted something older. He was 59 years old when he wrote that letter. He had been working on his mythology since 1914, when he was a 22-year-old undergraduate at Oxford. He had invented 2 complete Elvish languages with their own phonology and grammar. He had written and rewritten creation myths, genealogies of gods, histories spanning 20,000 years, all while teaching medieval languages and surviving 2 world wars. The mythology he built was not especially English in the end. It drew from too many sources, too many traditions, too many languages. But in overshooting his stated goal, he produced something no one had assembled before, a fictional world with genuine theological depth, rooted in primary sources spanning the entire Indo-European tradition and beyond. The Ainulindale, the first section of the Silmarillion, opens with Ilúvatar summoning the Ainur and teaching them musical themes. They sing. Their music shapes the world. Melkor, the most powerful among them, introduces discord. Ilúvatar incorporates the discord into a greater design, says, "Yea, let it be," and the music becomes real. Tolkien assembled this from several traditions. The most direct source is the Pythagorean tradition of the harmony of the spheres. Pythagoras argued that the planets in motion produce musical tones, forming a cosmic harmony inaudible to human ears. Plato developed this in his dialogue The Timaeus, where the demiurge creates the world soul through mathematical ratios. For Plato, music was cosmological. The structure of reality was musical at its deepest level. Boethius, writing in the 6th century, transmitted this idea to the medieval world. He divided music into 3 kinds: the music of the spheres, the harmony of the human soul, and the music humans produce. Medieval music theory understood all 3 as reflections of a single underlying order. Tolkien read Boethius in Latin and cited him repeatedly in his academic work. The double creation structure in the Ainulindale, first the music as an idea, then Ea as its material realization, maps onto Plato's metaphysics, the eternal forms as blueprint, the physical world as their copy. But Tolkien added something Plato did not have. When Ilúvatar says Ea and makes the music real, this is an act of will. Creation requires a free choice. It is deliberate love, not automatic emanation. Tolkien told Wheaton College scholar Clyde Kilby directly that the secret fire sent to burn at the heart of the world was the Holy Spirit, the 3rd person of the Trinity. The Ainulindale is Greek philosophy baptized into a Catholic cosmology. Melchior's dissonance fits the same framework. Pythagorean tuning theory held that certain intervals produce structured tension that can be resolved rather than random noise. Iluvatar incorporates Melchior's discord into a greater harmony. This is the Augustinian position on evil. It has no independent existence, but always corrupts something good, and providence can redirect even that. Tolkien refused to call the Valar gods. In his letters, he called them angelic powers, regents, stewards. He was a devout Catholic and could not have a pantheon. He built one anyway. Each of the 14 Valar has clear parallels across multiple mythological traditions. Manwë, Lord of Air, who commands the eagles, matches Zeus in function and Odin in atmosphere. Olmo, who speaks to the elves through water and rivers, is Poseidon and the Norse Njörður. Yavanna, goddess of growing things who shaped the 2 trees, is Demeter and the Norse earth goddess Jord. Mandos, who judges the dead and holds spirits in his halls until their time of release, is Hades and the Norse Hell. Aule, the Vala of craftsmanship who made the dwarves, is the clearest case. He maps to Hephaestus and the Irish smith god Goibniu, every tradition's divine craftsman. His relationship with his dwarves mirrors Hephaestus's workshop mythology so closely that the dwarves are what Hephaestus's servants should have been. Tolkien did not deny the parallels. In Letter 131, he described the Valar as the angelic powers of the world, each concerned with some aspects of its making and governance. This is directly the structure from Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, where each rank of the celestial order has specific cosmic functions. The result is a pantheon that functions exactly like a mythological one, serves all the same narrative purposes, and is theologically positioned as something other than a pantheon. Whether that distinction holds under pressure is a question Tolkien left to his readers. Tolkien first encountered the Kalevala in an English translation at around 19. His reaction was not ordinary literary enthusiasm. He called it a stupendous achievement and compared it to finding a mine of material richer than he had expected. He then decided to learn Finnish specifically to read it in the original because the Kalevala had given him a feeling he wanted to understand from the inside. The feeling was linguistic. Finnish has a phonological structure entirely unlike the Indo-European languages Tolkien knew from his classical education. Its long vowels and agglutinative grammar gave him the raw material for Quenya, the High Elvish language. Tolkien acknowledged this directly. But the Kalevala gave him more than a sound system. It gave him a story. Kullervo is a tragic hero born under a curse. His uncle murders his father, and he grows up enslaved. He seduces a woman and discovers too late that she is his sister. She kills herself. He takes vengeance on his enemies and dies by his own sword, which was glad to kill him. Tolkien adapted this into the tale of Turin Turambar, the longest and most tragic of all the tales in the Silmarillion. The incest, the cursed sword that speaks, the doom that pursues its victim regardless of his choices, the death at the blade's edge. He acknowledged Kullervo as the direct source in early correspondence. It is one of the most documented connections in all of Tolkien's studies. The name Middle-earth itself is worth pausing on. It did not come from Tolkien's imagination. It is a direct translation of the Old English word Midgard, used in Beowulf and throughout Old English poetry for the inhabited world of men. Both Midgard and Old Norse Midgarðr go back to the same Proto-Germanic root meaning middle plus enclosure. The second element does not mean earth in the sense of soil. It means yard, enclosure, the same root as the modern English word yard. The human world is the middle enclosure, bounded on all sides. In Norse cosmology, Midgard is one of 9 worlds arranged on and around Yggdrasil, the world tree. Asgard stands above it, the realm of the gods. Niflheim and Hel lie beneath. Jotunheim sits at the edges. Jormungandr, the world serpent, encircles Midgard at the boundary of the ocean, biting its own tail. The human world is defined by what surrounds it, the divine above and the monstrous at the margins. Tom Shippey, who later held the chair of English language at Leeds, where Tolkien had been professor before moving to Oxford, wrote in The Road to Middle-earth that a professor of Anglo-Saxon does not reach for this word by accident. It carries its full cosmology with it. From the start, it announces that this world belongs to the Germanic tradition of bounded human space, where heroic action means facing the powers at the margins rather than escaping them. Tolkien did not copy the Norse cosmology directly, but its spatial logic runs through everything. Valinor, the Blessed Realm, lies beyond the Western Sea. Morgoth's fortresses sit in the frozen north. The inhabited lands of men and elves sit in the middle, surrounded by powers they did not make and can never fully understand. The Hobbit begins with 13 dwarves walking into Bilbo's house. Their names are not invented. Beafer, Bofur, Bombur, Oin, Gloin, Dori, Nori, Ori, Fili, Kili, Dwalin, Balin, Thorin. Every name except Balin comes directly from the catalogue of dwarves in stanzas 10 to 16 of the Voluspa, the prophecy of the seeress in the Poetic Edda. Thorin appears in stanza 12. Balin has no clear source in that catalogue or other Norse poetry. The same catalogue contains the name Gandalf, listed as a dwarf. Tolkien took the name, changed its owner to a wizard, and kept the ambiguity that runs through the original Norse tradition, where the categories of dwarf, elf, and supernatural being blurred into each other freely. The Norse debt runs deeper than names. The atmosphere of The Lord of the Rings, the sense of doom and the long defeat, the idea that courage means fighting even though you know you will lose, this is distinctly Northern. Tolkien identified it in his Beowulf essay, calling it the theory of courage that ran through Old Norse literature. The gods know Ragnarok is coming. They fight anyway. Aragorn and Gandalf know the odds at the Black Gate are near zero. They ride out anyway. The Norse concept of the Draugr, the restless undead, fed directly into the Barrow Wights and the Dead Marshes. The concept of the Vargr, a wolf outlaw placed outside human society and its protections, gave Tolkien the word warg and its full moral weight. Creatures that have placed themselves outside any law, serving destruction as their only allegiance. Mirkwood carries its myth in its name. Old Norse, Mirkvid, dark forest, appears in the Prose Edda and in the Eddic poem Atlamal as a mythological border between worlds, the forest at the edge of the known, where travelers lose direction and ordinary rules no longer apply. Tolkien's Mirkwood works the same way. The elves hold the trees, the spiders wait inside. Thorin's company loses themselves in a darkness that works on the mind as much as the eyes. In 1936, Tolkien delivered a lecture before the British Academy that redirected the study of Beowulf for decades. Beowulf, the monsters and the critics, argued that the monsters in the poem are not incidental decoration on a historical source text. They are the center of its meaning. The dragon at the end matters more than the genealogies of Geatish kings. Tolkien was arguing against the scholarly consensus of his time. He was also arguing, as it turned out, for what his own fiction would do. The poem gave him material in 3 specific places. First, a word. Beowulf, verse 112, reads, Eotins and Ilfi and Orkneas, Etins and Elves and Orkneas. These are descendants of Cain, creatures in opposition to God. Tolkien stated in his own posthumously published notes that his word orc came directly from this line. I originally took the word from Old English orc, Beowulf 112, Orkneas. Tolkien's orcs carry an Anglo-Saxon etymology traceable to one specific verse. Second, the dragon. Beowulf ends with the old king fighting a dragon that has guarded a cursed hoard in a barrow for 300 years. A stolen cup wakes it. The destruction that follows kills the king and breaks the peace of his realm. Tolkien's Smaug follows this structure. The ancient sleeping dragon, the single act of theft, the scale of the devastation that comes after. Fafnir from the Volsunga saga gives the psychologically complex speaking dragon. The Beowulf dragon provides the architecture of the hoard, the long sleep, and the catastrophic waking. Third, the hall. Heorot, the great mead hall of Beowulf, where warriors feast and sing while the monster gathers outside in the dark, is the model for Meduseld in Rohan. The word Meduseld is Old English for mead hall. The Rohirrim speak a language Tolkien constructed out of Old English. Their entire culture is the world of Beowulf made explicit. Fire in the center, the king on his throne, the riders sworn to their lord, and something gathering in the dark outside. Tolkien called Welsh the senior language of the men of Northern Europe. He heard it on coal trucks as a boy in Birmingham, on freight wagons carrying goods from Wales, and found the sound of the words arresting, something ancient and close and untranslatable. Sindarin, the common Elvish tongue of Middle-earth's Third Age, is built on Welsh phonology. The soft consonant mutations, the specific vowel patterns, the overall sound of words like Caradras or Minhiriath or Ithilien. These are Welsh bones under Tolkien's surface. The Welsh mythology of Anon, the otherworld, fed into his conception of Valinor, the blessed realm in the far west. In Welsh tradition, Anon is across the water, accessible only to heroes and the favoured dead. The Celtic west across water paradise, Tir na Nog, in Irish tradition, provided the emotional template for what it means to sail west in Tolkien's world: departure, loss, a destination that cannot be returned from. The Irish dimension added a structural parallel. After the Tuatha Dea Danann were defeated by the Milesians, they withdrew underground. Each member received an earthen mound, and they became the Aes Sedai, the people of the fairy mounds. The elves' diminishment in the Third Age, their slow withdrawal to the grey havens and then across the sea, follows the same pattern. A powerful race, once dominant in the world, retreating as the age of men begins. Tolkien distrusted the Arthurian tradition as a foundation for mythology. In his letter to Waldman around 1951, he called the Arthurian legend imperfectly naturalized, associated with the soil of Britain, but not with English. He wanted something older and less French. He built it anyway, and then built Arthur into it. Gandalf occupies the same structural position as Merlin, the wandering wizard advisor who guides kings without ruling, appears at decisive moments, and cannot fight the central battle himself. The wizard as hidden intelligence behind the survival of a kingdom is specifically an Arthurian figure. Tolkien wrote his own unfinished Arthurian poem, The Fall of Arthur, in Old English alliterative verse in the early 1930s. Christopher Tolkien published it posthumously in 2013. He was writing Arthurian narrative in the oldest available English form before The Lord of the Rings reached its final shape. Aragorn follows the pattern of the once and future king. A rightful heir lives in exile, his claim unproven, returning in the moment of greatest crisis. He cannot simply take the throne by lineage. He must earn it through ordeal, including a descent through the paths of the dead that is structurally a catabasis, the underworld journey of classical heroic tradition. Galadriel in Lorien holds the same position as the Lady of the Lake, a powerful figure outside the main world who gives the hero meaningful gifts at the critical moment and then withdraws. Tolkien made clear in his letters that he wanted his mythology distinguished from the Arthurian world, and his reasons were considered. But there is a difference between what a writer says he intends and the material he has read and taught for 30 years. The Arthurian tradition was medieval English literature. He taught it for 3 decades, and it left traces. In a letter to W.H. Auden in June 1955, Tolkien described a dream that had followed him since childhood. An enormous wave, slow and vast, advancing over green fields and trees. He could not stop it. He called it his Atlantis complex and noted that he had bequeathed it to Faramir. The fall of Numenor was his Atlantis legend. In letter 131 to Milton Waldman, written around 1951, he described Numenor as the Great Atlantis Isle. In later letters, he called it a variety of the Atlantis tradition and wrote of his own use for his own purposes of the Atlantis legend. Plato's account in the Timaeus and the Critias gives the structure. A great island civilization, more powerful than any other, whose kings grow proud and grasp for divine prerogatives. A prohibition is transgressed, the island sinks. Survivors carry the memory to other shores and build lesser kingdoms from it. Tolkien's Numenor follows the same arc. The Numenorians receive gifts above other men, longer life, mastery of the sea, an island home separated from the mainland. One prohibition is placed on them: they may not sail west toward the undying lands of the Valar. Under Sauron's influence, they break it. Ar-Pharazôn leads a fleet against Valinor itself, and the island sinks. Elendil and his sons escape to Middle-earth and found Gondor and Arnor. Tolkien added one element Plato does not have. Those who refused to transgress the prohibition are warned and saved before the end. This is the flood pattern from Genesis laid over Plato's Atlantis, the righteous remnant preserved while the catastrophe takes the rest. Tolkien did not resolve these two traditions into one clean source. Material from multiple traditions stays active simultaneously, each contributing its part. That is typical of his method. "You cannot pass," Gandalf says on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun." The confrontation is structured as a collision between two divine fires. The Balrog is a Maya, the same order of being as Gandalf. Both are divine intelligences that took physical form to work in the world. The Balrog chose to serve Morgoth. Gandalf chose to serve Ilúvatar. The bridge scene is a civil war within the same celestial order. Tolkien named the Balrog's fire the Flame of Udun, connected to Utumno, Morgoth's original fortress in the far north, the first stronghold of his rebellion. The fire the Balrog carries is ancient, pre-creation divine energy turned toward destruction. Against it, Gandalf invokes the secret fire, which Tolkien identified directly as the Holy Spirit. The Balrog has no single mythological source. Surtur in Norse mythology guards Muspelheim and carries a flaming sword to destroy the world at Ragnarok. Zoroastrian Angra Mainyu is the destructive spirit opposing Ahura Mazda. Semitic fire demons from the Canaanite traditions Tolkien knew from his reading in comparative religion contributed their share. The Balrog absorbs all of these without being reducible to any one. What Tolkien invented was the specific theology of the encounter, the idea that divine beings can fall, that fallen divinity retains its power, and that fighting it requires invoking the original source rather than matching it on its own terms. Gandalf does not fight fire with fire, he fights fire with fire's maker. In a 1953 letter to Father Robert Murray, Tolkien wrote that The Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in revision. He repeated this to interviewers for the rest of his life. The theological structure runs through everything he wrote without exception. Evil in Tolkien cannot create. Morgoth corrupted elves to make orcs. He made trolls as mockeries of Ints. Sauron channeled existing divine power into the One Ring. Everything evil is parasitic on something good. This is Augustine's position, stated in De Civitate Dei. Evil has no positive ontological existence. It is the absence or corruption of being, not a force in its own right. The gift of men, the elvish name for human mortality, inverts the usual mythological logic. In most traditions, death is a curse or a punishment. In Tolkien, it is Ilúvatar's original design for men, a freedom from the circles of the world. Elvish spirits, after death, go to the halls of Mandos and eventually return to life within the world. They never escape it. Men's spirits pass beyond the world entirely to a destination unknown even to the Valar. The Númenóreans' catastrophe comes entirely from their refusal to accept this gift, their effort to hold on to life past its appointed time. In his essay on fairy stories, delivered as a lecture in 1939 and published in 1947, Tolkien coined the term eucatastrophe, the sudden, unexpected turn from apparent disaster to joy. He identified the resurrection of Christ as the eucatastrophe of human history. Good stories echo this structure, he argued, because all human creation participates in divine creation. The eagles at the Black Gate, the destruction of the ring by Gollum's fall, Gandalf's return from death, each is a eucatastrophe. None was planned by any character. Each came from outside their designs entirely. This theological framework is the operating system. Everything else in Middle-earth runs on it. In a 1971 BBC interview, Tolkien addressed the dwarves directly. The dwarves, of course, are quite obviously, wouldn't you say, that in many ways they remind you of the Jews. Their words are Semitic, obviously, constructed to be Semitic. Khuzdul, the dwarvish language, is built on tri-consonantal roots modeled on Hebrew. The root system, the construct state for possession, the phonological structure, all are features of Semitic languages, constructed with the same precision Tolkien brought to Quenya and Sindarin. The parallels go beyond language. The dwarves are a displaced people who maintain their own secret tongue while speaking the ambient languages of the cultures around them. They carry the memory of a lost homeland, Khazad-dûm, whose fall drove them into diaspora. Their 7 clans are scattered across the world, but share a culture, a script, and a religious tradition centered on a promised return. Tolkien described them in a letter as at once natives and aliens in their habitations, speaking the languages of the country but with an accent due to their own private tongue. The Norse roots of dwarf mythology go far deeper than most readers realize. The Norse Dwergar, though, were craftsmen and cosmological props without a civilization of their own. Tolkien gave the dwarves a full one, a secret language guarded jealously from outsiders, a history spanning tens of thousands of years, a theology of afterlife built around their origin in stone, and an exile narrative shaped by the loss of Khazad-dûm. None of it was Norse. Tolkien revised his understanding of orcs at least 3 times. The first version, orcs are corrupted elves captured by Morgoth in the darkness before the sun and remade by long torture. This appears in the published Silmarillion. The second version, this could not be right. Elves are immortal. Their souls are bound to the world. Corruption of the body does not corrupt the soul permanently. This meant either that orcs had no souls, making them mere automata, or that their souls could be permanently corrupted, which raised questions about whether free will and redemption meant anything. The third version, from late writings in Morgoth's Ring, published posthumously in 1993, Morgoth may have corrupted humans into orcs rather than elves. Humans have a different kind of soul, one less tightly bound to the world. This resolved some theological problems and introduced others. Tolkien never published a definitive answer. What he left is more honest than a solution would have been. The orc problem is the problem of evil, given a face and a sword. If you take the question seriously, if you refuse to say they're just monsters, you eventually reach the same impasse Finn did. Evil must originate somewhere. Something good must have been damaged to produce it, but the permanent damage of a person's essential nature sits uneasily with any theology of divine mercy. He left the question open. That was not oversight. The mythology came from everywhere. The architecture was his. The theological inversion of death as gift rather than curse was his own. No tradition he drew from framed mortality that way. The Norse gods dread Ragnarok. The Greeks invented Elysium because they could not accept plain death. The biblical framework treats death as a consequence of the fall. Tolkien restructured this entirely. Mortality was always the plan. He made it coherent within his cosmology by giving elves immortality and showing what it costs. Over long ages, they grow weary, and their spirits slowly consume their physical forms. They are enslaved to time in a way that men are not. The hobbits were largely his. The idea that the most important members of the fellowship would be the smallest, more comfortable with second breakfasts than heroic quests, this required an anti-heroic instinct that Norse and Celtic literature did not have. The hero of the northern tradition faces doom with his eyes open. The hobbit faces doom without being the kind of person who faces doom at all, and goes anyway. The concept of eucatastrophe was his. He named it and built it into every major story he wrote. The linguistic rigor was his. Inventing words is easy. Any writer can invent words. Tolkien invented complete language systems with consistent internal grammar, historical phonological change over time, and connections to real linguistic history. Quenya changed into Sindarin the way Latin changed into Italian, through phonological drift across millennia of separation. The languages of Middle-earth age and evolve like real languages because Tolkien understood how real languages aged and evolved. Nobody had done this in fiction before him. In 1971, 2 years before he died, Tolkien stood at a grave in the village of Wolvercote near Oxford to attend the burial of his wife Edith. He had arranged for the name Luthien to be carved on her headstone. On his own stone, added after his death in 1973, the name reads Baron. That is what the mythology meant to him. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find the full article with sources at crazyalchemist.com. New episodes every week on the things history quietly kept.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to visit crazyalchemist.com for more intriguing content and follow Crazy Alchemist on Instagram and Facebook to stay connected.